Welcome to this explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today. Because, when most of us think about ancient Egypt, our minds just instantly go to the pop culture version, right? We picture the gold-laden mummies, the curses of the pharaohs, and those massive cinematic pyramids. But today, we're going to look way beyond those myths. We're going to see how a civilization of this sheer magnitude is actually engineered from the ground up, literally using the very earth they stood on.
Seriously, how do you build an eternal empire in a desert? It's a hostile, arid, and completely unforgiving environment. Surviving, let alone thriving, in a landscape like North Africa requires this incredible, almost mind-bending mastery of the natural environment, plus a highly structured society. It takes way more than just brute force. It requires absolutely ingenious engineering.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're looking at the 4 fundamental pillars of power needed to build ancient Egypt. Taming the mighty Nile. Memphis, the first capital. Crowns of the pharaohs, and finally, Abydos, city of the dead.
Let's start with pillar number 1, taming the mighty Nile. Before you can even think about building massive stone monuments or raising armies, you really just need 2 things: water and mud.
You absolutely have to have a surplus of food to create wealth, and you need that wealth to feed a massive state bureaucracy. And this brilliantly illustrates how the ancient Egyptians didn't just survive the Nile River, they organized their entire existence around it. Fueled by heavy rains all the way up in the Ethiopian highlands, the Nile flooded predictably every single year. So they centered their entire agricultural life around 3 distinct seasons: Akhet for the flooding, Peret for plowing and planting in that nutrient-rich silt, and Shemu for the harvest.
Now, to put that into perspective, they were cultivating 800,000 hectares of land. That is a staggering amount of territory. Around 3200 BCE, King Menes spearheaded this massive basin irrigation system stretching all the way from Upper to Lower Egypt. They literally built a crisscrossing network of mud banks to form these giant basins, directing the floodwaters right through the canals. They'd hold the water in the basins to saturate the soil, drain it, and boom, you have perfect farmland. And get this, they used this exact system for nearly 1,500 years.
But let's bring this grand, nationwide scale down to human technology for a second. To get water to their crops during those bone-dry summers, farmers used this simple but incredibly ingenious tool, the shadoof. It's essentially a counterbalanced sweep apparatus. By using a high post, a fulcrum, and a counterweight to lower a bucket into the water, a single farmer could efficiently pull water right up to the riverbanks. This one piece of technology allowed them to expand their available farmland by up to 15%. It's just total mastery of water management.
Which brings us to pillar 2, Memphis, the first capital. Because once you generate all that immense agricultural wealth from the Nile, where does it go?
Well, it builds a state. It built the legendary city of Memphis. Strategically established right at the mouth of the Nile Delta, it was the exact boundary point between Upper and Lower Egypt. And just think about the staggering longevity of this city across the millennia. Founded way back in the 31st century BC by King Menes, it served as the heartbeat of Egypt for over 3,000 years. I mean, it survived being sacked by the Assyrians, it was occupied by the Kushites, it served as the headquarters for the Persian Empire in Egypt, and it even saw Alexander the Great crowned in its temples. It wasn't until the 4th century BC with the rise of coastal Alexandria, and eventually the 7th century AD with the Arab foundation of Fustat, which became modern Cairo, that this great city finally faced economic decline and abandonment.
Actually, you might know Memphis better than you think. The city was under the ultimate protection of Ptah, the patron god of craftsmen and architects. The grandest structure there was his great temple, known as Hatkaptah, which translates to the enclosure of the Ka of Ptah. When the Greeks arrived, they adapted that temple's name into their own language as Aegyptris. Over time, that one single temple in Memphis became the etymological root for the modern word Egypt. Pretty cool, right?
It's also super vital to realize Memphis was not just some static, monolithic Egyptian ruin like we might picture it today. It was a bustling, extremely diverse, cosmopolitan metropolis. It had a massive port called Peru Nefer, literally meaning bon voyage, which handled trade from all across the Mediterranean. The city even had entirely separate districts for foreigners, featuring temples dedicated to foreign gods. We're talking places like the Temple of Mithras from the Roman period and the Temple of Astarte, the Mesopotamian and Phoenician goddess. It was a true international trade hub.
But, as we know, time is a cruel master. By the 13th century, the city was heavily ruined, yet still absolutely awe-inspiring. The Arab chronicler Abd al-Latif visited the site and wrote, "These ruins still offer to the eye of the beholder a mass of marvels, which bewilder the senses, and which the most skillful pens must fail to describe."
He saw massive statues, like the 10-meter-long colossi of Ramesses II. Tragically, many of these very stones he marveled at were systematically dismantled over time to build the foundations of Cairo.
All right, moving on to our third pillar, crowns of the pharaohs.
So we have the land, and we have the capital city. How did the rulers sitting in the palaces of Memphis visualize and project their supreme power over this united but geographically divided land? Well, they did it through highly specific, perfectly symmetrical royal regalia. Now, what's really interesting about this is how the nation was conceptually split in two. In the north, around the delta, you had Lower Egypt, symbolized by the Deshret, or red crown, under the protection of the cobra goddess Wajet. In the south, the Nile Valley, you had Upper Egypt, symbolized by the Hedjet, or white crown, protected by the vulture goddess Nekbet.
To rule Egypt successfully, you had to control both. Enter the Pshent, the double crown. This was essentially the ultimate ancient corporate merger. By placing the red crown over the white crown, the pharaohs signaled their divine right, acting as the earthly embodiment of the falcon god Horus, to rule a perfectly unified Egypt. You see this constantly in temple carvings. It's the absolute ultimate symbol of supreme control. But here is a truly mind-blowing fact about these crowns. Despite their immense, godlike symbolic power in the art of ancient Egypt, not a single one has ever been found. No way, right? But it's true. No archaeologist has ever dug up a red, white, or double crown. And why is that? Because they weren't actually made of gold or jewels. They were likely crafted from incredibly fragile materials like woven papyrus, stiffened fabric, or leather. And this also goes for the famous Nemes headcloth, like the one on King Tut's mask, and the Kepresh, the blue war crown. The very physical symbols of their eternal power literally rotted away.
Let's move to and see how this builds into our fourth and final pillar, Abydos, City of the Dead.
With the land fed by the Nile, the capital of Memphis built, and the crowns of unification worn, the pharaohs needed to secure one last territory, the afterlife. To do this, they turned their attention south, to the stark desert necropolis of Abydos. Deep in the sands lies a burial ground known today by its Arabic name, el-Kab, which translates to the pottery mother. When you stand there, the reason for the name becomes instantly apparent. The desert floor is covered in a seemingly infinite sea of broken ceramic shards. Millions of pieces of pottery left behind from millennia of offerings to the ancient dead. It is a haunting, intensely sacred landscape.
So, the crucial point is, before the massive stone pyramids of Giza were even a thought, this is how the earliest kings were actually buried. For example, in Tomb Uj, archaeologists found an ivory Heka scepter, which is the literal hieroglyph for ruler. In tombs B1 and B2, they found the two-chambered resting place of a king named Iri Hor. Now, these weren't glittering golden tombs. They were simple chambers dug directly into the earth, lined with mud brick. Experts hypothesized that they were originally just covered by simple, slightly sloped mounds of sand and gravel.
And that brings us to a rather profound realization. Think about the engineering of this eternity. The physical, everyday symbols of their throne, those beautiful, intricate crowns, completely rotted away into nothingness. Yet, the literal mud of the Nile, used to farm and build, and the simple mounds of sand and gravel at Abydos have outlasted them by over 5,000 years. If the delicate fabrics of rulership vanish, but the mastery of mud and dirt survives millennia, what does that tell us about where true power actually lies? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.